Welcome to Casually Unboxed, data, AI, and everything. Each episode, you'll hear from industry leaders as they tackle the unique challenges and transformative opportunities facing large-scale businesses. Let's tune in.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Hardoon, and I'm the CEO of Aboitiz Data Innovation. Welcome to Unscripted, and today I have the pleasure of having Theodoros Evgeniou, and this is going to take me a while. Theo, I just realized you're a professor at INSEAD, co-founder of your OCD, an expert, advisor. What don't you do? Welcome. Thank you for the time for joining me today.
Thank you very much, David. Very much looking forward to having some good time with you.
Yeah. So actually, I realized that we started having conversations and actually knowing one another during COVID.
That's
where true. One of the, yeah, exactly. I went back and I started scratching my head as, hey, when did this whole thing actually really kick off? And interestingly enough, it was still about the topic of AI. We were really diving into the impact on how effectively AI can be used in managing, pandemics, disease, and then specific within the context of COVID. So you know what? I thought I'll just lunge in straight to that. Obviously, there's so many things we can talk about, but I thought, what is it, 2-3 years in the future after what we wrote, what we discussed, the pandemic that we were living in, and especially now with things like Gen AI and everyone's talking about it, have your thoughts changed? Or what's your view in terms of using AI in the world of healthcare and in the world of managing pandemics?
So, first of all, it was lots of fun to work and write together, and we should do more of this, and we were all busy. It's like a lot of the decisions are about information. And information can be, of course, backward looking always, but you also need a little bit like of assessment going forward, because you make decisions for going forward, decisions about who should get what and who is at risk later on. Who's at risk, you don't know before they get at risk, that kind of thing, right? You can see AI as like helping with both organizing the information and having some assessment going forward of what can happen. And of course, all this can help us make decisions. For example, decisions about how to allocate resources, because we don't have infinite resources. Resources regarding masks or vaccination prioritization, or you name it, who should be protected more than the others, etc., etc. If only we had, of course, the right data, and if only we could also share data across countries, which is, of course, a big issue, especially in healthcare. And you know a lot about this yourself. You worked on this in the financial sector also in the past. That would be a lot better. For example, just give you an example. A pandemic starts from an epicenter, happened to be Wuhan this time. At this time, and then you have early data about who is affected most, for example, or what works, what doesn't work. This data can and should be propagated and combined with data from other countries, so that the later affected areas, even within the same country, are better prepared. So there is, as I say, there is the biggest challenge in technology adoption is human behavior change, right? So if only we could share more data for healthcare, and some of it probably we can, and some of it we do, by the way, it will be a lot better for everybody. But again, this of course takes us to issues that have to do with anywhere from safety regulations and even geopolitics, which is what makes also the topic of AI fascinating in my view, which is AI is not only about the technology, it's about everything that has to do with human nature and policies and geopolitics. And that's
so Theo, you've just said a whole bunch of stuff I want to unpack, because each one of them is a marvel in its own. The first one that you were alluding to, and I think it's fascinating because of the possibilities, the potential, but also the social implications, good and bad, to be very candid about it. I don't think you used the exact terms, apologies if you did, of differential treatment. Now, on the one hand, using data, using such techniques of AI gives you a unique ability in terms of going down saying, David, what do you need? What do you need in order to really start helping your health? And in fact, I would argue moving us from what is arguably sick care to health care. But, and let me just pause on this one before I go to the rest. Are we ready for differential treatment, especially in today's more global trend of, I'm even scared of saying the term, but equality, this, social standing? It almost goes against the grain by saying, actually, no, everyone needs to have a specialized and a specific type of approach. So how would we maximize? How do we go down this path whereby we suddenly have this ability to be specific for individuals and to provide it in a way that's very different, arguably different in today's healthcare?
It's a great question. It cuts across many applications, not just healthcare, but everything else, right? Two things. First of all, differential treatment can be done badly, and we should be very careful with it. Absolutely. But on the other hand, I would call it, it depends on what you mean by treatment. Here is an analogy. An analogy is like giving everybody the same thing is not the same as giving everybody the same thing that they need. So what works for you may not work for me. So it's actually unfair to give both of us the same thing. Because for me it works, for you it doesn't work. So it's unfair. We should give to you something that works as well as what we should give to me that works as well for me. So
it's really outcome based.
Exactly. We should equalize the usual equity equality kind of debate, and we should maximize the outcome. And that requires, of course, it requires differential treatment on the input. Definitely, we should be very careful with not bad mouthing the differential words like differential treatment, because that is actually the only way to have equal output. There is no other way. So that's very important. Now, second thing is, of course, ideally we have equal output, but we'll never have equal output in this life. Let's get over it. Life is not fair in many ways, it is what it is. However, one more point to make here is that at the end of the day, sometimes even the output can be different as long as the process is fair.
Yeah.
The decision process is fair. So it's very important to differentiate between fair process and fair outcome. And fair process is something that actually I have a soft spot for, and I've been working with a colleague of mine on this who's really, really excited and expert on this topic, relates to governance and goes back also to all the issues that we can discuss later.
Yes. No, and actually it's a perfect lead up, because it goes to the other bundle I was going to touch on, which kind of leans to fair in a general sense. If you think about it, at least the way I think about it, it's one of the many pillars that constitute governance. And you were talking about, when, again, just to stay on topic of the healthcare, on the back of the kind of the conversations we had at the time of data quality, cross-border sharing, really understanding what you're dealing with, making sure there's a fair treatment. Now, why I wanted to just dwell on this a second, because it's been really interesting, and I've had a few guests that kind of also joined the podcast, and we ended up talking about data governance, is that the more we seem to be delving into AI, the more we seem to be delving into the potentiality and the applications, interestingly, we seem to constantly go back to how important data is, how important governance is. So you see, when I have a conversation with someone and we keep on going back to a first principle premise, it may mean to me two things. And again, you could say, David, you're being unfair here. It's either we don't understand the first principle, or we haven't done it right.
Both probably. First of all, data versus AI, it's all data. Everything is data. There is no, in fact, even one can argue that we are nothing else humans but a bunch of data, right? The neural activity. So everything is data, if you want to call it that way. And in the case of AI, the output of the AI is data itself. And so are the parameters of the AI, and so is, of course, the input of the AI. So we have to be clear here about, second thing is that if we were working on this with some colleagues a couple of years ago, a question to ask is, what is really raw data? There is some raw data, measurements from your body in healthcare or whatever, but there is a lot of data that actually is not raw. It's actually processed. So if you have any kind of scoring, of course, it's processed data. And the process comes out of some model. The model can be basic, it can be a simple addition, it doesn't matter. And of course, or it can be something very complicated, deep learning, AI system, whatever it is, a diagnosis based on your medical images, for example, which is again, but it's all data. And now the next question is, and we actually worked on this, unfortunately, I think it was a bit of a political topic, hence we had a very hard time publishing this, but we worked on this with some collaborators from Tsinghua University, from Harvard Law School, and from BCG. So it was like we've been a team that intentionally we were covering China, Europe, US.
Yeah. Well, already that's a challenging one.
It's great. We were friends and we had lots of fun, and we wrote something around data sharing across countries, across borders data sharing, and where data in this case, of course, means also AI models. And one of the main points we have in this article, which again, as I said, everybody was like pushing back, is that at the end of the day, there is different types of data.
Yeah.
For example, the output of an AI system is not the same as the parameters of the AI system. It's not the same as the input of the AI system. It's not the same as the design of the AI system, which is also parameters, like how many layers you have or whatever, or hyperparameters you have like shallow learning, for example. So the next question is, what do we share? Do we share like, we don't have to have the same policies and the same frameworks for all types of data. Which, by the way, there are technologies also, as you know, like federated learning or private preserving AI, where that allows you to share some types of data without violating principles and values that you want to respect. So we have to be very careful with two things. And just to close here, and I'll go back to your exact question, there is lots of different data. We have to treat them differently. AI creates all sorts of new types of data, and we have to think very carefully how we treat those. And now back to your first principles. Do we know how to think about different types of data? No, we don't. And that's why we were working on this project with my collaborators from China and the US. We don't. So in that sense, we haven't solved the basic principles, as you said. And I mean, we have to, because otherwise we leave money on the table, if I may use that term. Lots of value, in this case, lives on the table.
Yeah, and that's not a laughing matter. But absolutely. And many times, and let me give you one example that I always use in conversations. And again, I think we've had these conversations in the past as well, where the focus was then very much on discrimination. And I remember when people, this is again before Gen AI, before all this kind of stuff, and people say, David, there's all these risks about AI and discrimination. And again, don't disagree, absolutely don't disagree. But the question I would always pause back is, absolutely, let's park that for a second. How do you today deal with the risk of discrimination using your non-AI processes? And then there's that kind of usually awkward silence. And that's usually what I get back then, what I mean by first principles of, we need to constantly go back and make sure not even if its foundation is perfect, forget about perfections, good enough. And is it good enough for that next level? And if we identify that actually, no, it's not good enough for the next level, go back and do those tweaks, those refinements. And that's very much the approach that I've been we're taking right now in terms of from a governance, from an AI point of view, from a frameworks perspective. It requires a conscious, I can't think of a better word other than admission, but I think admission is a bit too dramatic of, hold on a second, maybe we haven't got this right. But when we just think about data governance, we've been doing it for a long time. We think, oh, we've done data governance. It's okay. Now we're just going to go and do this new thing about AI. And you have to pause and go, is it right? It doesn't make sense. Is it correct?
It's never correct. I think it's safer to assume it's never correct, because these are very complex, multifaceted issues. Plus, technology changes, it creates new opportunities, new versions of the problem. And human nature is complicated because all those things, interaction of technology with people. So I don't think I 100% agree with you on going back to first principles and rethinking the whole thing again and again. And that I don't think we should avoid this. I think we should be doing this all the time.
We should embrace it.
It's an iterative learning process.
Absolutely.
Right?
And the topic that you said that's also close to your heart, which I know, and this kind of leads towards it. Data is everything. And I know people would say, maybe to you, to me, it's like, you guys are biased. You see everything as data. And I'll say, yeah, you're right. I do see everything as data. That's my life. But it is. And data is a unique beast because it's ultimately representing something. It's representing a process. It's representing us. It's representing a potential outcome. When you now overlay that paradigm of fairness, it becomes particularly difficult. Why it becomes particularly difficult? Because one, forget about how do you assure fairness. How do you define fairness? How do you measure fairness?
20 different ways, as we know, yeah. Exactly, 20 different ways, and not all consistent, as we know, in non-theorems, right? And by the way, again, there's a lot of focus on AI, especially in AI. Lots of the focus has been on outcome-related fairness, not process-related fairness.
Okay.
And I think it's important that the community appreciates the difference between the two, which is very well known and standard in fairness literature from the philosophy side also for many, probably centuries. So in that sense, I go back to this because I think it's totally underappreciated in the community of AI, the difference between fair outcome, distributed fairness, and procedural fairness, basically. That's important to put on the table because we have to think about both, not only one. And procedural fairness is a different animal. We can build it with different policy tools, different frameworks, different processes regarding, or frameworks regarding who is involved when and how, for example. And eventually, by the way, procedural fairness can lead to a distributed unfairness. It's okay in that sense. And as you said, anyway, we will have unfairness according to some fairness measures. Get over it in a sense. And now having said this, I'll go back to what you said, which I think is also important to emphasize, which is how do you do all this fairness work without AI, with just humans? And the answer is you don't, right? So, and the second answer is, at least with AI, you have a chance to carefully measure, carefully control. With humans, good luck debiasing human nature.
It's like suddenly having a arguably unbiased third observant to the conversation. And it's very interesting you say that. And let me just plug this in before another conversation, another question I wanted to ask you, still on the topic though, is, like in the US, for example, it's known, and from a regulatory point of view, again, let me just use the topic of gender, sensitive attributes are excluded even from a collection point of view. And the kind of the topic that was brought forward by a few of the data scientists, chief data officers, who were like, how can I measure fairness or unfairness if I fundamentally don't have the information to measure against it? So it does really, like I said, it forces us to go back and realize that because of AI, arguably, and using such tools suddenly gives us a dimension and ability to identify irregularities, consistencies, fairness or unfairnesses. And that's a good thing, even if it gives us a bit of an uncomfortable feeling, let's say, because we're discovering some information that we maybe don't quite like, but that's a good thing. Same thing, which I used to tell folks when still helming out CDO role or data governance role. What I used to say is, I'm not scared about bad quality data. I'm not, because if I know of my bad quality data, I can do something about it. I can risk mitigate it. My worry is twofold. One, I don't know. And the second one is that it's inconsistently bad.
Yeah. So 100%. Go ahead, sorry.
No, so what I wanted to ask you, and before I move completely to a different topic, is because I know you've done a lot of this. Now, what we've spoken about, obviously there are frameworks. I mean, you've had a whole company that's focused in terms of how to help mitigating harm. But when you're dealing on a cross-border basis, where every country has come up with their own either guidelines, policies, some obviously have regulations, like obviously now the EU with its act, China has one, etc. A question that I know I've been asked, and many do ponder it, is how if I'm an international company, if I'm a person doing something on an international basis, and it doesn't obviously have to include all countries in the world, how do I approach this? How do I deal with these, on the surface, independent regulations and guidelines?
Yeah, the good bad news.
The good bad, I like that.
The good bad news is that this is a problem we've had always with all sorts of other kind of product regulations and services kind of frameworks, right? So it's not a new problem, and companies have been dealing with this. It's in many ways extra cost, and in some ways we have to have differences across countries, because especially countries which are democratic, people may have different preferences, so we have to respect them, right? As long as the regulations reflect what the population really wants, which is a question mark there. I don't know. Let's not get on that one. Having said this, and as long as the population understands what the topic is, which is also a big issue, because when talking about Europe, I'm wondering whether the population understands the situation of where Europe is and where it will go on AI specifically. But another long discussion. So having said this, having some differences is fine. Having differences which are unnecessary is of course inefficient. So there is a continuous improvement process. The way I see regulations, whether it's at national level or international harmonization level, the way I see them is like there is no such thing as a good regulation. There is only better regulation. So it's a continuous learning process. Yeah. So we are new in this space. Europe did something, China does something, other countries do something. Hopefully over time there will be harmonization of what can be harmonized and difference in what cannot be harmonized.
By the way, Theo, I really like that you use the word harmonization rather than standardization. If there's one thing I've been advocating, I won't say maybe advocating against is too harsh, but I don't think standardization is possible. Harmonization, on the other hand. Okay, and tell me if you disagree or agree.
Well, but everything is possible up to a point, right? There is standardization for product safety for different types of products for many years now, also in healthcare, right? Or for drugs or whatever. And as we know, the organizations like the IEEE and the ISO have been developing standards for AI certification, which are international organizations, right? So you can standardize up to a point. It will probably not take you that far. At some point, you harmonize, and the less you leave it as different and deal with it kind of thing, because our citizens don't want what the other citizens want. So it's fine, which is perfectly fine.
Which brings me to the view, especially when I think about things on a global basis, at least my argument, and again, happy to be told, David, you're wrong, is if you line up, again, whether it's a regulation, so full-blown have to comply to recommendations to policies. Obviously, there's slightly different nuances on each one. But again, with the specificity of AI, which falls into two buckets. One essentially is the build, and the other one is the use. When you line them up, my kind of view is they don't actually differ that much. They may use different languages, they may be different perspectives towards it. Obviously, there may be even ways of implementing in terms of mitigating risk slightly differently. But again, if you abstractize it and look across, saying it's all doing the same thing, is finding different ways in terms of creating data quality and consistency, measurement of risk. The $1 million question is, do you know the risk that you're exposed to? And then finally, in terms of how do you mitigate it? Now, then you have the country-specific aspects of certain things that as a country, as a society, as a legal system may say, we just don't want, we don't agree. And that can differ. But otherwise, again, on a conceptual level, my view is they actually are relatively the same. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Of course, absolutely. We have to be very clear, and I like the way you framed it, because we have to be very clear what we have similar and what we have different. Very clear on this, because currently I'm not sure we're clear on that, and also because we are not clear in general about AI risks and what they are. As you said, we don't even know what the heck the risks are. And by the way, we didn't even know what the risks were for the internet, which is
we're still finding out.
We're still finding out, and it took us, I don't know, 25 years, a quarter of a century more or less. If you think about this, a quarter of a century, that's a long time. A quarter of a century before we start thinking about regulations for the internet, right? Europe came and had the Digital Services Act months ago, which is what we also do at Tremo, as you know. So hopefully with AI, which is potentially more complex, because it's not just humans, internet was mostly humans. Some recommended algorithms that create issues, but mostly humans interacting. Here you have humans and AI interacting, so it adds more complexity. Hopefully we will be a bit smarter in this case. However, paying attention on not regulating something way too early, but being very vigilant. I think we were very naive when it came to the internet. When I say we, everybody, we were very naive when it came to the internet. Yes, there was Section 230 already early on. Things didn't work out exactly perfectly. There have been a lot more vigilance, and there was some vigilance, of course, and there have been improvements throughout the past 25 years, but we didn't get really our heads around this as much until much more recently. So hopefully with AI, we have at least vigilance. It's a continuous learning process, and learning, as we know from machine learning, the same for human learning, it requires data. So we have to continuously understand and measure what's happening in the world in terms of AI risks, learn and adjust quickly. And the next question, of course, adjust regulations. We know how slow these processes are. Back to agility for regulations requires a learning process and a good governance process. For example, I'll give you an example. For the EU AI Act, everybody focuses on the usual high risk, low risk, and applications, etc., etc. The best part for me of the EU AI Act, or the most important part, I don't know if it's the best, but the most important part is the part that discusses about the governance. Board, the AI office, how they will revise and review the regulations over time. We have to set that part in place, that process in place, the revision of the regulations and the governance. If that's strong, that allows fast learning and evolution, especially for technologies which go so fast. Our best approach, our focus should be how to set up fast, adaptive, agile regulatory processes for these technologies that go really fast. That's who should be our focus. And that's why that part of the UAE Act for me is the most important one. Whether we got it right or not at the beginning, yeah, sure, it's better to get more right than more wrong. But as long as you have fast reflections, fast reflexes, hopefully fix things before they are too broken.
What you're describing, and I think it's a very important point, is, and to be fair to regulators, I think it's a bit of a learning curve for them as well, really moving away from being very prescriptive. Because the velocity of technology, I know this sounds like a marketing catchphrase, but it's just true. The velocity of technology is so damn fast. By the time the regulation is enacted, the technology has already changed. But what doesn't change is what you said, and I really actually like that, is the framework, is the governance. It's the mechanism in which you go by in terms of assessing the specificity and therefore the underlying risk.
That's why that's the most important part from the regulatory point of view.
Absolutely. And this is wonderful. You've highlighted something also earlier, which kind of is part of what I was going to move to anyway, which is about the learning. And I mean, you've been I just saw this, you've been a professor for 23 years.
Yeah, I didn't learn. Early, I didn't learn.
Absolutely. So now with AI, and we've spoken about the differences, the perspectives, the views, what's been the impact? And maybe I could break this down into two parts. What's been the impact in learning for literally like how people are learning? And then I guess not just joint, but maybe deliberately, slightly separately, what they're learning.
People,
Yes.
just for me to make sure I get the question right. So the question is, what will be the impact of AI on how we learn and what we
How
learn?
we learn, yeah. So how we learn and what we learn, if there is an impact. Arguably, I think there is.
Probably the impact is more from the recent use of AI, because just before people didn't, until, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, and definitely 2 years ago when Gen AI became like the household name, people were not even aware of these technologies, and it was only strange people like the two of us that were working on the AI for the past, I don't know, half a century or so, or 30 years or whatever it is. So in that sense, it was less applicable. Although there were some things like where you customize like the choice of lessons of courses online, you pace the education and training of and exercising for students. So there are lots of things like this. But the question is more, what will be the impact of technology today on now? Learning can be many things. Can be learning at the education level, can be learning at the corporate level. What do we learn in the business? What do we learn about our customers, about our people, about learning at the scientific level? How do we do science? So learning is a huge thing. And long story short, I think we're at the very beginning of how the technology will impact how we learn in all those different senses. I personally like very much the science is about is learning. It's another learning process, right? We are learning the science of whatever the topic is. We are learning about that topic over centuries, right? So the how and when I say science, and science also social science, not just natural science. So the impact of AI on science more broadly, I find that to be the most fascinating impact on our collective learning of how the universe and ourselves work.
In what way?
Because it will impact how we do science, A. So therefore, that's a reasonably hypothesis. It will supercharge how we do science. And also it may do parts of science, when I say AI, may do parts of scientific processes itself. And that's fascinating. It almost sounds like science fiction, but I think it's not science fiction anymore. I'll just give you one of my favorite quotes that I think summarizes a little bit the key value of AI, which comes from Demis Hassabis, who happened to be a postdoc of my PhD advisor, Tommy Poggio, that we both know very well and we admire. I personally admire him very much. So I guess it's not surprising that Demis said that quote, because Tommy was always saying learning is at the core of intelligence, and the question of intelligence is the most important scientific question ever, more than anything else, more than how to understand the universe, how to solve healthcare or whatever, simply because once you build something more intelligent, that thing will help us, or it will solve other problems. So the way Demis summarizes this is, I think, a quote which is on their building of DeepMind in London. I haven't seen it, but that's what I've been told. That goes along the lines, we will build and understand intelligence, which will then help us solve all other problems, kind of thing. I don't remember the exact quote, but something along those lines. And I think that's very important to understand, because this is really what makes AI unique relative to everything else. And that's also why one can call it a general purpose technology, because intelligence is a general purpose technology.
Theo, you said two things that I want to pause on again, which kind of blows my mind. So the first one is, I do feel that sometimes there's a lack of awareness, perhaps maybe not appreciation, but awareness of just how new it is in terms of the learning space, not academic learning space, because AI in various amorphic terminologies has been around for a long time.
When I do executive education programs these days, which there's a huge demand for customer programs on AI for executives, I always start by asking the participants in the courses, when do you think AI started getting used first in business? And they all get surprised by that the answer is it started being used centuries ago. When you have rules, right? Rules for in banks, for example.
Absolutely. But actually learning about it in a conscious manner, it's a very new thing. And why I think this is important to highlight is because it's also a sense of expectation. It's like when you send your kid to primary, you can't expect them to achieve the outcomes of secondary and vice versa. So again, obviously there's an age difference here. The concept of learning is the same. You need to learn the foundation of 1 + 1 before you go into differential algorithm. So that's one. The second one, which I really like the way you said it, because I've been saying it slightly differently, that the core of intelligence is learning, if I got the gist of it. Okay. What that also says is the more you learn, the more you have to learn.
Yeah.
Why is that important? And the way I've been saying this to people is, for example, there's been a massive, let's call it confusion between automation and AI. So many times people approach the world of AI by saying, oh, let's use this to help reduce headcounts, to remove FTEs and so forth. And my response has always been, if that's what you want to, don't bother with AI, because the only outcome from AI is you will need more people. And why do I say that? Is because if more, how can you logically need less? Because you now know more. You have more possibilities, more opportunities, more things to explore, more things. Again, obviously, you may not want to do everything, but you literally have more in front of you. How can you logically have less resources to deal with now an abundancy of knowledge and information?
I love this way. I never thought about it this way. And I think I totally buy it. And in a sense, it's history repeats itself, because in a sense, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, we didn't know what we could do today. And when I say what we could do, I include there all sorts of new products and services and things we can do. Therefore, over time, throughout the whole history, we've been learning collectively, including learning new things to do. And of course, as we learn to do new things, we need more resources to do those things. And now,
Exactly.
So it's a usual story, which basically, if you think about a technology only as an opportunity to automate today's tasks, you are missing the big picture. You don't know what will be tomorrow's tasks for tomorrow's products and services. And as we become more intelligent with a combination of AI collectively, not individually, humans probably are not becoming more intelligent. Actually, there's lots of data that shows our IQ, whatever this means. I know it's noise and all that stuff. It's been dropping recently, but that's another story. As we become potentially more intelligent, there will be more new things we will think about to do. Therefore, new innovation is what basically creates the need for more resources eventually, right?
Correct.
Of course, what we don't know is maybe everything can be done by AI. I doubt that will be the case, because
Equally doubt it. Equally. And actually, so again, 2 points. I remember I used to get asked, I don't get asked this anymore. Maybe people realize my response is, oh, is AI going to take over the world? And my response usually is, or has been, is, well, look, if we research, design, and implement AI with the sole purpose to replace you, don't be surprised when you're replaced.
Yeah.
However, if you research, design, and implement AI that is meant to enlighten you, augment you, help you in the underlying process, let's not be naive. Obviously, there's going to be certain things that it will be able to do better than you, more efficiently than you. But the fundamental premise is that it's always there to support and enable what you're trying to achieve. What I was about to say earlier, and I think this is and I kid you, literally the $1 million question, which I think many executives struggle with, and I think this is the difficulty, is how do you translate knowledge? How do you translate intelligence into money? That's the eternal paradigm. And this is the difficulty that even I struggle with, because AI, to me, is a synonym, it's an engine for intelligence. Now, and that's a key word, some of that intelligence can have an immediate, almost like a linear line to, this is how I can make money, or I can save money. But there's a lot of intelligence that doesn't, linearly or immediately translate to, oh, this is how much more I'm going to make. That's the real difficulty.
It's a big difficulty. And part of the difficulty is that humans are the problem, as we said. But how do you do this? I guess the answer is, as they say, how do you go bankrupt, slow and then fast, right?
I've heard that so many times.
Exactly. So I think it's similar here on the other side, which is how do you create value slow and then faster and faster?
And it suddenly happens.
Because you learn as an organization, as an individual, as a team, and as an organization.
I'm going to steal this from you. I like that. How do you result in it? Slow, and then suddenly it happens.
Yeah, faster and faster, not suddenly, faster, because we are learning, right? It's an organizational learning part of it. Just give you an example. Most executives, if not all, I don't think I ever met an executive that didn't complain about this, actually, complain that we've had too many AI pilots in our business. Yeah. And my answer is, that's not the problem. That's not only too many pilots that didn't work and cost a lot of money. And my answer is always, that is called tuition money. You pay tuition for the organization to learn. And then, of course, and you have to have some failures, because if you don't have some failures, people didn't take enough risks, they didn't try, they didn't learn. So this is a tuition the organizations pay early on, all these pilots, all this experimentation, and they have to do it in order for the organization to learn what to do with these technologies. And then, as you said correctly before, I think, I agree with you on that, as we learn, we can do more. And that's when the cycle starts, the flywheel, the AI flywheel. I think I like that term of AI flywheel. There are also different AI flywheels. This is another AI flywheel. It has to do with skills and understanding and organizational learning. The AI flywheel starts turning faster and faster, which, by the way, this creates a different issue potentially, which is those who are the flywheel goes slow at the beginning and then faster and faster, right?
Yeah.
Which means that whoever is ahead by a day is
We'll be
probably
ahead.
by a lot more in terms of speed.
Yeah.
And this will be the distance between the first and the second will keep increasing because of this flywheel and non-linear effect.
You can't stop, you can't pause, and you can't wait. In fact, here in this space, I would say that the cost of lost opportunity is far greater than in other areas.
Totally.
Because of that impact.
Jump on this, but of course I'm biased and probably both of us.
Yeah, of course.
Jump on this as fast as possible, because any day you delay, you increase the distance from the rest by a lot more than a day, basically.
No, absolutely. Theo, this always blows my mind when we're having conversations.
Yeah.
I bring it down to, if I go all the way to the beginning in terms of first principles, having those frameworks on AI and data governance. Like you said, everything is data. We'll use AI from a marketing perspective, but it's all going down to having those frameworks. And even though there's still a bit of a mess, a bit of stuff, we have enough to be good enough to actually roll up and do. Secondly, it's all about learning. It's all about learning and ultimately pursuing after that intelligence. Now, whether you want to go to a Yale, an INSEAD, or local college, it doesn't matter. But it's about that learning, realizing that it's the non-successful pilots is not a bug, it's a feature.
Exactly.
That is underlying part of the process. So, Theo, thank you so very much for your time. As always, it's been fantastic.
We have to do more of this and write more. We have to write more.
Thank you.
David, thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning in to Data, AI, and Everything. Make sure to subscribe for more episodes that explore the cutting edge of data and AI. Stay tuned and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.